let's go over the agenda for today. I just have a couple of little things. I'm doing a lot of, I never spend enough time, despite what it may seem like I could, kind of just doing research and catching up on things. So I got a big old pile of stuff to look through. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to have, if you remember, Bosky back on, and it'll be great. We can talk more about VI admins and Kubernetes. I'm reading a book that she co-wrote, one of those dummy books, and I've read some other stuff. And it's occurring to me, one, I don't really know that much about what VI admins do and vSphere and all of that. And it's actually interesting. People suggest that one way of adding to things you're learning is to read about alternate things, right? Other options, and that kind of gives you a new view onto the main thing you're reading. So in learning how actual VMware virtualization stuff works, how vSphere and all these other things work and orchestrate things, it kind of highlights why Kubernetes does what it does. So for example, one of the things that's sort of fascinating in this stance of comparing things is that so far from what I've read in the vSphere world, there really is no management of what happens inside the VM. There's no awareness of the application state. In contrast to the way in Kubernetes, there's an extreme amount, again, in comparison, there's an extreme amount of knowledge of application state, the code that's running in the container that's in the pods, or, however you kind of end up mapping it. And you can see this because in the Kubernetes, I hate using the word API in the Kubernetes world, but whatever. In the Kubernetes way of doing things, the API, there are methods, if you will. There are mechanisms by which Kubernetes, when it's creating, spinning up, spinning down, or just checking on the health of something, that you have to implement inside your container just to do health checks, because Kubernetes does care about what's going on with the application. And not only will it make sure that a server exists, that a VM exists to run things on, but it tries to make sure that your application is in a good state, and then it will spin up your application as needed. Bring down applications or your code processes in a bad state and replace them with what it thinks the good state is, which is, that is a pretty key difference between the way the two things operate. And it does make me curious, surely people do that in the vSphere world. Maybe they have to do it on their own and it's not standardized. But anyhow, we're recording that later on today. And, assuming that everything goes all right, I'll just broadcast it for tomorrow's episode, as I did with our previous interview. And you should definitely go check out the first thing I did with Bosky. It was great. It was I like finding something I'm ignorant about and learning about it, and that's what happened in that episode. So I've got two things I wanted to go over. One is I'm kind of lazily thinking about this idea of putting together a little book on mindset shifts, if you remember. And one of them I was thinking about one day, as I think about so many things, riding to and from, dropping my kids off from school, living in Amsterdam. I get to ride my bike everywhere. It's pretty wonderful. Being a native Austinite, biking is big in Austin, but for us common people, it's entirely unrealistic. It's really hot. There's lots of hills. Cars will probably get in the way and kill you. And so it's a new experience that I have living here. And it also rains a lot here, right? And so I've been thinking, so I also have a Buckfeet, like this big old bucket bike. I could show you a picture of it, but I'd have to look it up. But the thing about the Buckfeet, it's kind of like, to make an analogy back to Texas, it's like an empty pickup truck, right? So you're heavy on I guess it's the opposite of the weight on an empty pickup truck, but you're heavy on one end and really light on the other end, if you don't have kids in the bucket part of it. And so what happens on the Buckfeet a lot is what happens in a pickup truck, except in reverse, right? On a Buckfeet, you got the weight on the back because that's where the rider is, and it's empty on the front. Whereas a pickup truck, all the weight, the engine is in the front, and the lightness is in the back. But you end up skidding a lot on either thing, especially if you go around corners too fast, or just things will happen. Or Sometimes you have to slam on your brakes on a bike, and you'll skid around a bit. And I was thinking, it's kind of scary to skid, but nowadays I've done it so much that it's just like a part of riding, right? Like I just think about like messing up, entering into a skid, kind of like having to balance. And you notice yourself doing this when you ride a bike a lot. Like you just like will throw your legs out all of a sudden to balance so that you don't fall over. And as I've taught my daughter to ride a bike, and give her a lot of credit, I didn't really do much teaching. She just decided one day she was going to ride her bike, and I insisted that I hold her here and there. And you tell them a few things. It's hard to tell people how to ride a bike because basically you're just like balance. like the only thing I could figure to, other than telling her that it'll be fine, the only two things I could figure out that were tactical to tell her was like, it's really important to build up a minimum amount of speed or momentum. And a lot of the magic of a bike is that if you've got enough speed, if you've got that momentum pulling you forward, it's a lot easier to balance than if you're going slow. And then the other thing was like, if you feel like you're going to fall, just put both feet on the ground, right? And it took her a little while to understand both of those things. I don't know if it's hard to understand the first, but like she definitely is good at just like put your feet down if you feel like you're going to fall. Kind of too good. She'll just like stop in the middle of the bike path. It's not a good idea. But anyways, when you're not only teaching, when I've not only taught her how to ride a bike, but as I watch her, we have like a 25, 30-minute bike ride each way. So as I kind of watch her ride a bike and kind of see her like get better at it, like the one I try to always tell her, because she's midway through getting really frustrated at messing up, right? Like taking a scary turn, or like having to stop all of a sudden, or maybe even skidding around, right? Like when she encounters some, I'm just going to call it messing up. When she messes up like that, very often she just like, she's like her old dad. When he gets frustrated, the system just grinds to a halt. Everything stops, and she hates everything, including me, and gets really angry, and just wants to like burn everything down. Now, thankfully for her, that lasts about 30 to 120 seconds. For me, it's usually, well, it's not like bikes cause that, but for me, it usually lasts like 30 minutes to 4 hours. I'm getting a little better at that, at rebooting my system. But what I've been trying to tell her, like the thing that I'm trying to get her to understand, is that when you mess up, you can build up a skill of recovering from it. And the other skill, not only recovering from it, sort of mean time to repair in our nerd terms, but at a certain point, you get good at messing up, which is to say, just like with the skidding, you're going to skid around. Like there's no way to avoid it, right? You're going to take turns in a wrong way and end up on the curb, or you're going to get confused about whose turn it is to go at an intersection. There's going to be bikes that almost run into you. You're going to almost run into bikes. Like also, you're going to mess up all the time. And the goal is not to never mess up. And therefore the goal is not to like, or a result is that you're not frustrated with messing up, but the goal is to just get like good at messing up, just to like be able to go through it and not only survive messing up, but just kind of use it as that momentum that you have. And I think she's slowly like understanding this, because she gets less and less angry. And so, for example, having to stop at an intersection is always a bit of a problem, because if you can imagine, it's a bottleneck, going back to yesterday's episode, where everyone comes together and like everyone has to stop. And then stopping is not such a big deal. The big deal with like bikes at an intersection is everyone starting up again. So if it's just like the three of us, my son and my daughter and me, like we're paying attention to each other and starting up is fine, right? Like, because you just kind of coordinate. But if you've got a whole bunch of different people at the intersection of different ages, right? Older people tend to be a lot more polite and aware in their bike riding. And then you've got a bunch of kids, people in hurries, not hurries. Like that kind of starting up thing, like is difficult because people don't necessarily coordinate well with like recovering from that. Or not recovering, but starting up there. So this morning, I hadn't really thought about it till now, but we were at a major intersection, and her starting off, she just got kind of off on the wrong thing and kind of like went out of the path, and then even like hopped over a curb. And then there's another section where, you're crossing the intersection and there's people waiting to go this way. I should make a diagram. But they're piled up here, and then they're also piled up here. So you usually have to go through this narrow slot to go through the people waiting at the other part of the intersection. And this morning, even though she messed up, it's sort of like it didn't really happen. She's experienced at messing up and recovering from it. And so I've been thinking about that concept a lot as, things I do commonly, I analogize to, all this digital transformation nonsense advice. And it occurred to me that a lot of what we talk about when you have a mindset of getting better at software, so your organization can use your software cycle, creating software, running it, blah, 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 as like a core way of not only running, but innovating the business and strategically using it. You can insert my spiel in here, but that one of the skills you need to develop is like messing up. Like you got to be good at messing up, because you're going to be trying a lot of things and you're just going to mess up, right? And even things that you're good at that you do every day, right? Deploying software, which people want to be a non-event, or dealing with the boring layer of Kubernetes or whatever. You're going to mess those up too. So it's almost, and you can't ignore that you're messing up, right? Like you can't just like smile through it, because you need to know how to recover from it or roll back or whatever. But you should just be comfortable with messing up and start to be good at it, right? Start to figure out, oh, I'm messing up. Here's what I do, right? And this is subtly different than learning by failure, right? Like whenever you fail at something, an experiment, like kind of recover, getting better, because this is more just about the routine things that you're going to go through every day. And there's just a certain amount of like sloppiness of messing up that you need to get to, or you need to be good at and accept. And there's an example of this in site reliability engineering, where there is, what do they call it, an error budget. I always forget phrases for stuff. I'm also terrible at remembering people's names. So if you ever encounter me, you can play a little cruel game with me and try to trick me into remembering your name. You'll see that I'm very good at like not even using pronouns, but just like avoiding even addressing someone. I can't do that Dale Carnegie stuff of like using people's name to charm them and make them feel good. Anyways, but I think it's like the error budget in SRE stuff. And the error budget is kind of being good at messing up. It's just like, I don't know, this amount of errors is acceptable to happen. We don't strive to be 100% perfect, because errors will occur. And so in fact, we're going to tell you the comfort area that we have of messing up. We can have this many errors and it's totally cool, right? This many dropped connections or this many whatever, and everything's fine. And now negotiating what that comfort is, what that error budget is, how good you are at messing up, how frequently you're comfortable with messing up. That's really like it's annoying to say business driven. In fact, let me write that down. Let's see. Oh, I'm in the wrong area. I wrote up sorry, this is like probably annoying, but this is a great time to say, hey, are you interested in learning more about cloud native development and, reading up not only on the development part, but also, a little bit of what you might want to know about Kubernetes and other things like that. If you are, boy, do we have something for you. And that is if you go to tanzu.vmware.com/developer. That's tanzu.vmware.com/developer. We've got this great site with all sorts of topics. Now, I'm looking forward to hopefully what we'll be dumping into the Agile section soon. Dumping. What we'll be adding is, and you can start to see some of it here, right, is we have a whole practices book. It's an online sort of manual or directory from our Pivotal Labs people, who are really great at product-oriented development that we'll be adding into there. But there's also all sorts of other topics that you can browse through to basically become a better developer and just keep up with things that are going there. You can also, it'll list all of the TV stuff. Let's see. Oh, look, who's that? It's me. There's that interview I was just talking about. You should go check out. But anyhow, so I was working on my first piece. Speaking of the business, and defining terms. The reason I stopped all of a sudden to note that down is over here in the Agile section, I want to start up a little thing called Cote's Codex of Confounding Crap. I won't call it crap, but I want to take terms like the business and digital transformation and define them in terms for like developers and IT people, right? So that they're not such like, I think it's easy and justified, but also dangerous to throw out terms like digital transformation and you roll your eyes at them, and business value, because those are while they're jargon, they actually mean should/can mean very specific, important concepts for how you do IT. As in, for example, back to our topic, when you're defining your error budget, when you're getting comfortable with messing up, when you do that in the SRE world, you negotiate what that error budget is with the ops people, the SRE people. And the way you do that is a very business-led conversation, right? You're thinking about what does it mean for better or worse, whatever business value, for errors to happen. For, let's just say, a low risk one would be that there could be an error that when I click checkout for my cart, it says, oh, that didn't work. Do it again, right? Now, there could be, I would suggest that that's probably, the friction between in a retail environment between intent to buy something and getting someone's cash. That's a very harrowing path for a lot of retail, right? A lot of people decide they don't want to spend the money or they want to do it later, right? That's why often when you fill up a cart or a basket online, if you don't actually buy it right away, a little bit later, you get an email saying you can get a discount, a 10% discount. That's people like my wife often purposely don't check out so that they can get those emails so they can stack on that discount. But there's a big critical moment between clicking to buy something and actually giving your cash up for it. And so there's one stance you could have from a business standpoint that errors in that part are not cool, right? Like we should eliminate as many of those errors as possible. On the other hand, you could say that, well, if there's an error in the recommendation engine, right, and we can't really for whatever reason, we can't hook up to the customized recommendations because the batch job didn't run last night, or we can't get access to real-time analysis of like if the person is buying this, also given their past buying history, here's other things they might want to buy. Like that is a significant part of revenue, but balancing it out against can't complete transaction, we prioritize and value can't complete transaction more, so we're willing to put up with more errors in the recommendation engine, right? So that kind of business value led, product manager led, I would suggest, way of negotiating what your error budget is an interesting, incredibly important way to think about how you get comfortable with failing, right? How you get comfortable with your bike skidding. Now, there's a related concept which I'll kind of try to elucidate and babble on about some other point that, as always, he's good with phrases that my friend, as he likes to say, Andrew Clay Schaefer, put it once at one of these executive events that we had, which was like, don't learn to surf if you can't swim, which I think is kind of like the kind of Excelsior feathering that you want to put under this idea of getting comfortable with failing. I guess one thing to ponder when it comes to bike skidding and don't surf if you can't swim is the Dutch do not wear bicycle helmets. It just is like, it is beyond not even thought of as a thing that one does not do. It's just people don't do it, which is an interesting take on things. So finally, just as a small item, I am always very interested in manuals for everyday life. I when I talk with my therapist and other people, let me adjust my chair here. Oftentimes, when it comes to an impasse of me functioning in an ideal state in life, I'm basically like, I don't actually know what normal is there. And, don't get me started on people who are like, there is no normal or whatever. Then we just have some discussion about mean and medium and clusters of people and like what the expected response is for the stimulus for like, 20 to 30% of the population and how you get a deviation from, whatever. There is a normal. People just try to make you feel better. And, they're trying to give you a tool feel guilty about not being in those clusters or whatever. That was a weird tangent. But I often am looking for like, just like, give me a manual. Like, don't tell me to like feel something from my heart or go with the flow or be myself. Like, I just want a manual for doing things. And one of the things I always want a manual for is small talk, right? Like as I have, darkly joked many times, I'm not big on hanging out with people. Mostly strangers, but like sometimes people. And there is I have thus, in my travels, read and found many books on small talk. Some of them are not about small talk at all. They're about like people's enjoyment of cocktail parties that socialites went to, which, Tina Brown's Vanity Fair diaries are a good example of that, and actually pretty instructional for sort of like how to do small talk and casual hanging out. I would recommend listening to the audio version of it if you are into that. As always, when the actual author reads their own work, it's phenomenal, right? Because they read it the way that they heard it when they were writing it. But, there's I thought I would have this as a in topic. There's a book that I found some time ago called The Fine Art of Small Talk. And it is actually a perfect example of the kind of thing I'm always looking for, an actual manual of doing small talk, right? Now, there's always, exhaustingly, chapter 1 in a self-help book, which is like telling you why you should be interested. I this time of year, I try to listen to a lot of self-help books because I feel like, I need to up the amount of books I've read in the year. And boy, I loathe these first chapters because it's like, it's almost like you've bought the book and the book is trying to sell you on buying the book. And you want to be like, I got the book. I'm interested. Just zoom past it. Let's get to the meat, but whatever. So there is, as you can see, these chapter titles are not too instructive, but it gives you an overview of what's in there. And let's just I thoroughly recommend it. Again, The Fine Art of Small Talk. Let's go to some of the parts that I highlighted that give you, where are the lists? That are actual, there's just like lists of things to talk about, right? So business icebreakers. Let me zoom in on this. These, and I highlighted a few of them, and then I'll tell you one that I try to use a lot. And, this is just like you're in a work context, as I often am, and you're just supposed to like hang out, right? And as a vendor, if you are polite and slick enough about it, then you can slowly start to nudge towards like, tell me what your problems are, help me understand what issues you have such that I might match up what I want to sell to you, and maybe sort of let me like casually mention differentiation and value props that we have and why you would want to buy our stuff. Now, if done correctly, right, all of this is organic and naturally happens, and people actually enjoy it in a bi-directional way. But I find myself in these situations many times, and so there's a good list of things, and I think this is one that I use every now and then. But it's something that I use frequently, which is basically just like, how did you get here? Right? Like, what's your story? And depending on how like corny American I want to be, right? Like you can say like, what's your deal or what's your story? But you can say like, how did you get into this role? And it sounds cynical to say this, but people like talking about themselves. And it's not so much that you're pandering to them, but I think in a situation like this, in a business situation, people want something to talk about, right? And, they're either going to find something to talk about that like isn't a bunch of small talk stuff, which is great. Like I'm always super thrilled when people are like, all right, let's talk about software, or like, let's talk about this, when they want to lead the conversation. But sometimes people just need something to talk about. And so giving them the opportunity to say like, tell me about you. Tell me about how you got here is a great sort of way of doing small talk. And then, the important part here is as they say interesting things, you kind of file it away to follow up on and ask about. And, that's to add in my thing. That's kind of the variation that I have there is I like to say like, what's that like? Or what was that like? Right. So like, not only what's the story of how you got here, but what was it like to move to that? And what was it like to stop doing that? And, when you moved to Scotland, what was that like, working there? And then another one. So this, I don't remember this one, but it's great. Like here's like, this is more of kind of like a theme, right? How are you able to tell if a melon is ripe, right? So there's almost like, which is a good question. Many people have theories on when watermelons are ripe and melons and things like that. And so this kind of cooking food stuff, I try to, I use this not as much as I should, but you can kind of ask how you do that and how you determine if the melon is ripe. And it's a good, this is a little straightforward. Tell me about your family. It's sort of like the guy in Blade Runner, right? Like, you want to know about my mother? I'll tell you about my mother. But, and then this is similar to how did you get here, right? But like, oh, how did you learn that, right? Which allows you to go into all sorts of other things, right? But I think, if you're like me and you always want a manual of how to do things, that's a great book to look into. Well, now with that, let me get to the call to actions that I didn't cover before. If you watch this all the time, you'll know what they are. You should call to action yourself. But if you want to get started with figuring out how to modernize your application portfolio, figure things out, you can schedule an hour, a half day, a day-long workshop with us. Now, if you want to sign up to that, I'm not going to give you some big old fangled crazy URL. You just go to cote.pizza. You can scroll down and you can register for some software development office hours. Just fill it out. You got to put your correct information in there because we are not good enough to divine who you actually are. But it's a good way to get some free consulting advice, maybe even practice some small talk about how you're looking to improve the way you do software. And then in addition to, as I mentioned earlier, the developer portal, if you want to learn about Kubernetes, and there's an especially good section for, if you're, whether you're a developer, you're kind of fresh to it from the kind of DevOpsy world, or if you're like from the VMware world and you're a VI admin, if you go to kube.academy, we got all sorts of courses for you. You can see a kind of the topic areas and the lists, and it's all totally free. Some of them you have to, have an account, sign up for. But you can even take some of them without even doing that. And you can see we got some pretty cool clip art. But the content is even cooler than the clip art that's going on there. Now, as always, I'll put some show notes, hopefully some links to things that I talked about. If you go to kote.io/Tanzu Talk, you can find the archives for all the episodes that I do. I put these all on YouTube afterwards, so you can go look at them, and you can find links to things. And I try to broadcast every weekday at around 11 o'clock Amsterdam time. So, with that, tomorrow I should be back. I'm going to broadcast a pre-recorded interview with Bosky talking more about Kubernetes for VI admins. And with that, have a good rest of the day.